South Florida has their latest champion. The Florida Panthers have won their first Stanley Cup. And we here today on Locked On Dolphins look at that organization for some inspiration as we look at the future of the Miami Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. The Florida Panthers win a thrilling 2-1 Game 7 Stanley Cup final to bring the Stanley Cup back to South Florida for the first time ever. And I did a show like this, something along these lines last year, and I tried to be mindful of what we talked about last year versus this year. But the Florida Panthers have been on a big-time journey. And from being the league's best team and flaming out in the playoffs to kind of overhauling and revamping their entire style of play, to losing in the final last year to Vegas in 5 games, to winning this year, being up 3-0, going to Game 7, winning the game, getting back to what they do as a team in Game 7 versus kind of the slump in the middle of the finals. And full transparency, right? I'm not a big-time hockey guy, or at least I haven't been until kind of the Panthers got their claws in me last year in the playoff run. And I'm like, hey, man, playoff hockey, it's really intense. It's fun. And then you start learning more about the team. And then you watch the journey for the team over the past year. And for the Panthers to finish the job this year and finish the job in a way that was typical South Florida sports fashion, right? It was as anxiety-inducing as it possibly could be. It was really cool to sit down and watch the game last night. And Panthers never trailed. They score first. They give up a goal shortly thereafterwards, and then they played tight defense. They marked Connor McDavid, who's one of the best players in hockey. And I know, like, you're listening to this show for football takes and to hear about the Dolphins, but there's some parallels that I kind of want to get into. I kind of want to get into what the Dolphins haven't experienced that the Panthers experienced in their return run and run at a championship and the journey that they were on. And I think one of the first parallels that I'm mindful of is one of the broadcast calls, and I've watched a bunch of them in the last 12 hours, talked about when they opened training camp this year. They had a singular goal, which was to get back to the Stanley Cup final and finish the job. And I understand hockey and basketball, there's a lot more moving parts in a football game, right? You have more than twice as many players on the field simultaneously. The rosters are 3 times as big. So hockey, basketball, it's a lot easier to build a team and find a player. But I think that's what's cool about the Panthers team that was collected and won the cup this year. It was not one player. There was an entire cast of characters who at different times and different moments with different backgrounds all stood up to the challenge. And that's something that great teams have, regardless of sport, regardless of how many players are on the field or the pitch or the gridiron or the rink at one time. And that is an element of the Florida Panthers that I can only hope to aspire that we see with the Miami Dolphins. Now, I think the good news is you look at kind of the collection of the talent, and there is a collection of talent for guys that have been in these moments, or they've been in the league It is a little bit more balanced from a youth movement and a veteran presence perspective. And not just veterans, but guys that have actually achieved the goal that this team is going to try to achieve this year. You think about they brought in Jalen Ramsey last year and Odell Beckham, who were on the same team with the Rams. You think about those guys and Teron Armstead with what his experiences were in New Orleans, and Calais Campbell with what his experiences have been and all of the stops that he has been. And it's guys that have either been to the top of the mountain or that they have seen everything there is for this league to offer and are still capable of playing at a high level. And this roster has kind of made this transition from top-end talent this offseason to a little bit more of a balanced distribution, and it's a deeper team. And I think that if you're looking for the pathways for success for the team, you did lose a cornerstone player in Christian Wilkins, and you lost two high-end quality starters that were fringe cornerstone-type players in Connor Williams and Robert Hunt. But Christian Wilkins, as much as you could possibly replace him, Calais Campbell for $2 million. Like, it's a great ad for a player who can provide similar impact at times, but for a fraction of the cost. And granted, a shorter term solution, but nevertheless, more experience in these moments that when you reflect on the Florida Panthers and Game 7 and that game, they had a lot of guys throughout the course of the playoffs that were able to step up and make plays, whether it was Bobrovsky in net or Sam Reinert, who the team acquired via trade. There's a mix of free agency, trades, homegrown talent. They wheeled and dealed and put together a roster, and we'll get a little bit into that with the team building approach. But it was all fronts, not just one solution of assembling a team and having the right combination and chemistry of players. And the GM, Bill Zito, was asked about that. And I'll tell you what, Bill Zito's an impressive cat. Pun intended, I guess, right? Panthers, cats, get it? With some of the things that he had to say and his perspective on why his team was special and what they tried to achieve in assembling a team. We'll get into some of that next, as well as one more thought on the journey here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. I love sports, and last night was an encapsulation of so many of the reasons why, but you never want that lull period, which is unfortunately what we're entering into now. You still have baseball and golf, but basketball's done, hockey's done, football's not here yet. As the playoffs, we close the book on that chapter. We get fewer games. Sports aren't necessarily sporting it like we want them to, but FanDuel keeps the mood going whenever you want and wherever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. This was a talking point that I did include last year with talking about the Panthers and the team that they were when they won the President's Trophy, which is the most points in the regular season. So you were the most successful regular season team. And then they got bounced in the playoffs, and they kind of pulled the cord and made a bunch of changes fundamentally to who they were as a team. And it paid off 2 years later. But as I reflect on Florida, that team, and the fact that they enter training camp with one singular goal, no matter how many guys were new players on the team this year, the objective was get back to the Cup and finish business, because we were there, we were close, we went through that, we experienced that loss. And I think to some degree that is a universal, not always, but a lot of times a universal trait of successful franchises, where think of it from a football lens. And everybody thinks about Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City and these 4 Super Bowl appearances and 3 wins in 5 years. And they are unequivocally a dynasty, right? And this is the latest dynasty in the NFL. And they have been a team that has won at least 12 games in 6 of the last 8 years to go with 4 Super Bowl appearances and additional 2 appearances in the conference championship, right? All the success in the world. But before Patrick Mahomes got there, this team went 11-5 and lost in the wild card round. They went 9-7 and missed the playoffs. They went 11-5 and lost in the divisional round and played a 9-7 Houston Texans team in the playoffs that fielded Brian Hoyer at quarterback. Like, that was the 3-year stretch before they drafted Patrick Mahomes. Then they do go 12-4 in 2016 with Alex Smith at quarterback. They go to the playoffs and they lose in the divisional round to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they have a 4-year stretch where they made the playoffs 3 times. They had 4 winning seasons. They won 1 playoff game. Now, that's where they made a fundamental change and drafted Patrick Mahomes. Actually, there's a 5th year here where they drafted Mahomes, but Alex Smith was still the quarterback. They went 10-6, and they lost to the Titans by a point in the playoffs too. It's a 5-year stretch, 5 winning seasons. Then they had a catalyst for change, and then they had the big breakout where they go to the conference championship, and then they win the Super Bowl, then they go back to the Super Bowl, and they lose. And from there, it's like pedal to the metal. And it's a little bit of an unfair parallel to make because they've acquired what is turning into the next generational quarterback. And there's only one of those guys that exists, right? And I can't sit here and say, well, the Dolphins, they just need to find their Patrick Mahomes and all their problems will be solved. It's the bigger picture of the entirety of the team. And it's not just the Chiefs that experienced, hey, we're good, but we need whatever that catalyst is for change to become great. For the Florida Panthers, it was, we play a style of play that is too open ice. When we get to the postseason, we need to be able to play a different style of play. And there's some interesting parallels that exist within the Dolphins themselves there and how Miami chooses to play football. And I think it correlates. If you can play at home, you can certainly play whatever brand of football you want based on your home field advantage. But in cold weather situations, how do you handle that? And we'll find out more about this Dolphins team with what this year brings in that regard. But think about the Rams, the Los Angeles Rams with Sean McVay, who were a team that went to a Super Bowl and lost. They were a team that was not good for a long time. They were abysmally bad with Jeff Fisher at the end. And then Sean McVay comes into the picture. They become an 11-5 team. They go 11-5, 13-3, 9-7, 10-6. They made a playoff. They made a Super Bowl appearance there in year 2, but they ran out of gas against the Patriots. And it was like, okay, are we on the downswing now? Is the window closed? What do we do? 11-5, 13-3, 9-7, 10-6. We missed the playoffs after the Super Bowl loss when we went 9-7, and then we lose in the divisional round when we go 10-6. And the playoff game that we had was a win against Seattle in that point in time where we kind of cakewalked them. Are we done? Is this it? Is this what it's going to be? And they found another gear. But part of it is the fundamental change, and the other part of it is the maturation of the experience, the growth of it. And you listen to Paul Maurice, the head coach for the Panthers, and you listen to Bill Zito, the GM of the Panthers, and listen to them talk about the experiences of the room, the experiences of the locker room, the guys that they have, the type of players that they collected, and their experience as a team, talking about the journey of what they've built and how it doesn't happen overnight. And there's a maturation of the organization that has to come with that. And I think about the Dolphins and that, like, they're in that process has happened now. And now it's like, okay, you guys need to take the next step now. Because Miami, before 2020, they were 6-10 and 10-6 and 6-10 and 7-9 and 5-11. And now they're 10-6, 9-8, 9-8, 11-6. 2 wild card losses in each of the last 2 years. Like the learned growth and experience with the young guys and kind of tasting what it's like to be close, mixed with an infusion of new talent that can provide a catalyst for change with a different defensive scheme and different hallmark players. Like so much of the old guard, we talked about that last week with there were scheme departure changes last year, but this year felt like it was the talented departure from what the old guard was for the Dolphins, for the old version of the Dolphins from the 2018 to 2020, 2021, 2022 type of era of the football team. You have had the catalyst of change, and you've had the maturation, you've had the hardship and struggles that most teams have to endure to some level before they have the breakthrough. And that's where I look at where the Dolphins are at. And you're hopeful that they've collected enough sweat equity in that regard. And it's not to say, hey, they're going to win the Super Bowl this year, but for things at the end of the year to be different. And you hear Raheem Mostert talk about it, and you hear Teron Armstead talk about it, and you hear these players on the team talk about like, we just got to do it this year. We've experienced it. We've been close. We have to do it this year. And if it doesn't happen this year, well, then we'll look at the context of what did and did not happen and why. And we'll try our best to wrap our heads around it. But you can't just be results binary induced, or you're forever going to chase your tail, right? Because there's only a handful of organizations across all major professional sports in this country that end the season happy. And one of them just so happens to be the Florida Panthers this year. Now, the Dolphins and Panthers parallels and what is and is not there, we'll get into a little bit more here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. One of the quotes from Bill Zito that I thought was really enlightening was he talked about the kinds of players that they had in one of the post-game interviews, and he's down on the ice. And he talked about the ability to he was asked, collecting talented players is one thing, but collecting talented players with chemistry is something else altogether. What is the secret? What did you guys do? And he talked about the talent acquisition, but then also giving the players the opportunity to fail and learn and then grow from it. And this Dolphins organization, I feel like you reflect on one of the pain points of last year in 2023. Look at Cam Smith. Cam Smith, the Dolphins had injury issues at cornerback and a second-round pick who was your top draft choice, which showed out and flashed quite a bit in training camp. And I could tell you from the assessment of the film that we have of Cam Smith is a talented player. And the door was kind of shut on him from the very beginning for whatever reason to be able to play and learn and grow through it. And I think you contrast that with over on the offensive side of the ball with Mike McDaniel and think about what some of the players were on Miami, Austin Jackson, Tua Tagovailoa, during the Brian Flores era of the regime, and where there was high pressure and high stakes and negative energy, really, that is poured into mistakes. And it's been reported in a bunch of different places that, like, that was a large source of friction with Flores and his players. And who knows whatever amount of the truth we will get for 2021 midseason with the Watson rumors lingering and Tua, and was he able to play or was he not able to play? And then he goes golfing on Thursday night. And like you poke around enough, you'll hear stories that give you some perspective on where the truth lies in that matter. But you'll never really know the truth because any version of it that you're going to get at this point is somebody's version of reality, right? Then there's the Tennessee game with Tua and Flores. And then Mike McDaniel comes in, and there's a change in the energy, there's a change in the focus, and there's a change in the process. And you have seen growth from Tua Tagovailoa. I'm not saying he's a perfect player. I'm not saying he's a finished product. I'm not saying he's the Messiah that we need him to be to win a Super Bowl, right? But the fact of the matter is, the player that he was before Mike McDaniel versus the player that he is after Mike McDaniel, it's not just, oh, they're calling better plays and the plays are better designed. And that same thing is exuded by the Florida Panthers organization, talking about the leadership and the chemistry in the locker room and the guys with the camaraderie that they had. Just don't ask Tyreek to say camaraderie. It's one of my favorite subplots from Hard Knocks into this offseason is Tyreek saying camaraderie. But the Dolphins are chasing and pursuing that. And I know that can be kind of an eye roll inducing statement because it is cliche. And Bill Zito himself said, this sounds, it's kind of cliche, but the people. And it feels like between Anthony Weaver coming in to put that in on the defensive side of the ball, the cultural element of the team from afar as a casual watcher of the game, but somebody who takes a great interest in team construction and the strategy of that. The Florida Panthers strike me as a first-class organization in that regard. And the Dolphins have been striving to have that since they've made these fundamental changes in 2019. And there's been blockades along the way, but they've been given the chance to not flush everything out of the system and tweak and tinker and make a change here, make a change there, while still moving towards their big picture vision of having that thing that helped make the Florida Panthers special. And I think that's good because so often and so easily it's a microwave society. You expect everything to happen now. And it doesn't work like that. And instead of, I didn't get it now, so throw it away. It's the Toy Story meme with Woody and Buzz, right? Andy's got Buzz and he's throwing Woody away and he says, I don't want to play with you anymore. I don't want to play with this version of the Dolphins organization anymore because they didn't want a playoff game in 2 years and they made me wait 20-something years, even though these guys have nothing to do with that. And yeah, I hate the playoff drought too. I hate it as much as all you guys do. But to say, oh, they won one game in 20-something years and Chris Greer's been in the organization that entire time, throw it all away. And go back to square one. Bring somebody else in with a fundamentally different vision, and then you got to go through that whole process of all that. There's like a cultural people element that exists that it's easy to roll your eyes with if you just consume the game through, okay, well, it's on TV. What happens? Do they win or lose? Oh, they won? Great. We're good. Oh, they lost? They all stink. Fire them all. Do it over again. It's so much more nuanced than that. It's so much more complex than that. It's so much deeper than that. And that's where it's really cool to see people and organizations that have been able to encapture that, put that lightning in a bottle. One of my best friends in the world is Joe Marino, who's a Buffalo Bills fan, right? He knows the Buffalo sports casually. There's like 4 guys from the Buffalo Sabres team that have been critical pieces, including Sam Reinert, of Stanley Cup winning teams in the last few years that all played together in Buffalo on the same team. They had talent. They had talent, like critical Stanley Cup winning talent. And they could do anything. Like they couldn't even make the playoffs together in Buffalo. It's deeper. It's deeper than just the result. There's a process element. And I think Miami last year defensively in particular missed some of that. And we'll see if Anthony Weaver can bring that. That is going to do it for me here. I didn't really have to, I watched the game. I've watched kind of the playoff run for Florida. I'm familiar with him because I really got into it last year too. But I watched the game last night. I watched a lot of the post-game stuff. And I knew it's like, I want to talk Dolphins and Panthers and talk through it with you guys. I didn't really know other than, hey, here's the bullet points on kind of like what each segment thematically is going to be. I didn't know where it was going to go. So I hope you guys enjoyed. The rest of this week, we're going to be looking back at the 2024 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint. That was my content from late February and early March as far as the what would I do with this offseason? And we're going to look at what was said then versus what's been produced. We're going to compare and contrast. We're going to see how the Dolphins did, see the things that I got right, the things that I got wrong, as far as not just players and personnel, but also like strategically what they did and did not do. That's the rest of this week here on Locked On Dolphins. Appreciate it. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Fins up. I'm out of here.